Hi folks, welcome back to Physics with Captain Rod. Making this video is just a conceptual video to talk about current and voltage and what's dangerous, what's not. And in the example I'm going to talk about here, I spent about 8 or 9 years raising sheep. And what we would do to keep our sheep penned in and safe from predators. Now, we didn't have a lot of T-Rexes around. I just used this as a kind of generic predator. But, we had things around like foxes and raccoons and coyotes and stuff like that. And we used an electric fence system to keep our sheep in. So let me talk a little bit about that fence system and why it works so well and why it's a relatively safe device here too. So first of all, when you're setting up an electrical fence like this, imagine these posts here, and then what we do is we have these wires that go around it. Now, an important thing here is that these wires can't be connected to this post, especially if it's metal. If this post were metal, this would instantly short it out. Even if these posts are wood, you still don't really want these touching. So generally what you do is you would wrap like an insulating material around here so that this metal was not in actual contact with the wood. So in my picture, that's important to understand. These wires go around the post, but these wires are insulated in this region so that they don't actually touch this post. Right? Now, what I've got here, here's a picture of my garage, and here's a picture of my fencer here. And the fencer has two outputs here. It's got an output and an input. One's typically labeled plus, one minus. And here's how the thing's hooked up. So the terminal that's labeled minus on the fencer, you attach to a post, which is driven into the ground. And, in the language of circuits, if you look at a circuit diagram, you'll see a symbol that looks like this. And that symbol actually means ground. It couldn't be more literal. It means that if you have a wire that's grounded, it means if you follow that wire, it goes and is connected to the earth in some way, shape, or form. Usually this is driven down 6 or 8 feet or as far as you can get it so you have a really good connection with the earth. Now, the other terminal goes to one of the wires. And how many of these wires it touches, that depends on who you ask. Different people like to rig these different ways. Here's how I rig mine. I like everything live. So I run my fencer to one wire, but then I take just a short strand and I wrap it here, and then maybe another strand and I wrap it here. The way I run this, all of my wires are live. And what that means is you can get hit by touching any one of these. Sometimes what they do is they like to run a live one and then ground one and then a live one, especially when you're trying to deal with sheep, because sheep have a lot of insulation. And the advantage of running one like live and then ground is if the sheep tries to walk through it and they hit the top, the live one, and the ground, they get a shock basically across their face or their nose, which is pretty uncomfortable. They don't like that. I like them all live because I like to, especially when you're trying to keep a lot of predators out, I like anything that touches this to get hit. Now, fencers now. They come in various voltages. I run a real big dog fencer. And the reason I run a big dog fencer, sheep are hard to control because they have all this insulation. And furthermore, when predators try to get to your stuff, I'm a big believer in punish them for it. And the larger the voltage on your fencer, the more punishment these guys have, and the less likely they are to come back. I run a 200 mile or 100 and some mile cattle fencer. I think mine's a 12,000 volt fencer, give or take. Maybe it's 10,000. I would say your average fencer, if you bought it for small farm use, they're usually somewhere between maybe 3,000 and 7,000. Again, I went way overboard because I wanted to be sure that no predators could ever get through. And I wanted to be sure that I kept the sheep in. Sheep are very difficult to fence because of all this insulation. Now, 12,000 volts. I want to talk about, is that dangerous or not? So, when you're talking about voltage, voltage itself doesn't kill people, right? What kills people is electrical current. However, as a rule of thumb, the higher the voltage, the more dangerous a situation is because you'll have more current. So let me go through some cases, like a 1.5 D-cell battery. Nobody's ever going to kill themselves with a 1.5 volt D-cell. You're not going to kill yourself with a 1.5. You're not going to kill yourself with a 9 volt. You're not going to kill yourself with a 12 volt car battery either. I can't imagine how you would, unless maybe you did something ridiculously stupid like, I don't know, maybe if you took one terminal and actually broke your skin and ran the wire into your left hand, and then you ran another wire inside your right hand, that might do it, something like that. But just generally touching a 12-volt battery, there's no way it's going to kill you. Generally speaking, DC voltages aren't considered to be real dangerous till they're around 50 volts or higher. Truthfully, myself, I don't ever play around with anything more than 12 volts. I'm kind of a rather be safe than sorry person, but certainly 12,000 volts sounds really dangerous compared to the 50. Well, the thing is that fencers limit the current, so even though it's an extremely high voltage, the current it gives is very short duration and very, very low. Long story short, that makes it very painful, but it's not dangerous. None of these animals, that I've ever seen have ever been physically damaged from that. So it's current that's dangerous. You can kill yourself easily with 120 volts, no doubt. If you grabbed onto something and you couldn't let go, that would definitely be dangerous enough to kill you. The analogy I like between current and voltage is this. Imagine you're standing on a really high cliff, right? Voltage is a measure of potential. In fact, it's a measure of what's called electric potential. But there's also what's called gravitational potential, and they're very, very, very similar. If this person were at the bottom of the cliff, we could say their potential is zero, because you can define potential from wherever you want. And then if they're up here, they're at a high potential. Well, the higher the cliff, the higher the potential. Now, this person could be standing on a cliff 1,000 feet tall. Isn't necessarily going to kill them. What kills them is if they fall off the cliff, accelerate down, and bang, hit the ground. It's the impact with the ground that kills them, not the cliff itself. But the thing is that the higher the cliff, the more dangerous that impact is going to be. It's not the actual cliff that kills you, so it's not the potential at this location that kills you, but the higher the cliff, the higher the potential, the more dangerous that fall is, and that impact is what kills you. Voltage and current, kind of the same thing, because as a rule of thumb, voltage and current is a function of your voltage. So these two things are related. Normally we would say current is a function of voltage. In this case, even though it's a very, very high voltage, it's a very low current. That's just the nature of how these things are designed to work. Another thing I want to chat about here too is how the circuit gets completed. So, in order to have a current, you have to have a closed loop. So let's imagine Mr. Sheep here tries to get out of this fence. So maybe he walks over here. But the instant he kisses that middle line there, remember the line is live. And remember my video on conductors. The conductor itself is an equipotential. So this line, this is all constant potential. Now I don't want to do this in red. I'll just use the gray as my constant potential color. This is all 12,000 volts, and this is grounded. So the ground is at a potential of 0. So here, if that sheep touches this line is at a potential of 12,000, and the ground is at a 12,000 volt potential. So what can happen is you can actually complete the circuit through the sheep, through their feet, and again back to the fencer. And that's why you can actually get a current. And it'll end up being pretty uncomfortable for the sheep. Again, not dangerous because the fencer limits the current. Fencers are designed to be very uncomfortable, but not dangerous. And again, if Mr. T-Rex here decides he wants to go try to get a snack, and he touches that line right there, the instant he touches that line, and remember the line is at a 12,000 volt potential with the ground, he can complete the circuit. And again, I want everyone to follow the circuit. The complete circuit would be here through the wire, T-Rex. Now again, 12,000 volts is enough to complete this circuit through Mr. T-Rex, through the ground, back to the earth, back to the fencer. There's your complete circuit and why he would get an electrical shock. So, so that's how the fencer works. It's a relatively high voltage. Even though my fencer is a 12,000, or maybe it's 11,000, but it doesn't matter if it's 11 or 12. Suffice to say, it's a pretty high voltage fencer. It's not dangerous per se, because again, it limits the current to very, very, very small values. It's pretty darn uncomfortable. Boy, I've been hit by it, and let me tell you, it's wow, is it intense. But I've never heard of anybody actually getting killed from a fencer. So when it comes to electricity and voltage, it is in fact electrical current that kills you, but voltage is dangerous because voltage is what creates the current. Much like this example, it's not the fall that kills you, right? It's the impact with the ground. But the higher the cliff, the higher the potential this guy starts at, the worse that impact's going to be. So, you know, standard voltages, you're not going to hurt yourself with a 1.5 volt battery or a 12 volt battery. I mean, you'd have to really try hard and be creative to hurt yourself with a 12 volt battery. Even 24 is probably fine, but I still wouldn't touch the leads of anything more than 12 volts because, you know, just because something doesn't kill you doesn't mean you're not doing some sort of cellular damage at all. So my advice, you know, don't mess around with any voltage higher than 12 is my advice. And you know, you shouldn't really mess with voltage at all, to tell you the truth. But you can handle 1.5 volts and 12 volt batteries without too much fear. Standard household voltage is 120 volts. I mean, that's a relatively high voltage, and that's an example of what's called an AC voltage. That's different than the fencer here. This is a DC voltage source. And I'm going to make other videos to talk about AC voltage and DC and the differences between them. But, you know, household wiring's enough that could kill you through a couple of different mechanisms. I think heart stoppage is the one that gets people the most, if I remember right. But, you know, it's something to be to respect and be kind of careful around. Now, that doesn't mean that if you bump into a live wire, you're going to be done. You're going to be toast. Most people that hit a live wire in a 120 volt situation survive it, and usually there's not much damage. But you know, you want to be careful around anything certainly higher than, like I said, I think my rule of thumb is anything over 12, I start being real careful. I've seen it written down anywhere between 30, 40, 50 where people start really getting afraid, especially DC voltage. Anything over 50 is considered to be very dangerous. So even though it's the current that kills you, again, the voltage is what creates the current. That's what you have to keep in mind. As a rule of thumb, the higher the voltage, the higher the current will be if you screw up. So anyway, this was just meant to be kind of a conceptual video about voltages and fencers and how they work. I hope it helps visualize some of these concepts. Have a great day.